The Philadelphia Eagles, to me, are one of the most fascinating teams in the NFL. They've been to the Super Bowl twice in a 5-year span with 3 different quarterbacks, basically, 2 different head coaches, and 2 completely different teams. That's crazy. Think about Bill Belichick since Tom Brady's left. He ain't done shit, which should tell you how hard it is to do what the Eagles have done. In 2017, Philly shocked the world and flew on the wings of their backup quarterback to an unlikely Super Bowl win. The first in franchise history over Tom Brady and those Belichick-coached Patriots. 5 years later, they're the reigning NFC champions that came one drive away from winning it all again. And now, halfway through the 2023 offseason, they've reloaded and possibly gotten even better than they were when Nick Foles hoisted the Lombardi in terms of sheer talent.
Jason Kelce's too small. Lane Johnson can't lay off the juice. Brandon Brooks has anxiety. Nick Foles don't got it. Brandon Graham was drafted too high. Nigel Bradham can't catch. Jalen Mills can't cover.
After that magical victory over the Patriots, Philly has fired their head coach, traded their first-round quarterback after paying him, rebuilt a decimated receiving core, and figured out how to retool a dominant defense. It was not perfect, but the Eagles pulled off an expedited rebuild, and Howie Roseman, GM, cemented himself as one of the premier general managers in sports, the envy of other GMs, pressing nearly all the right buttons, pulling the right levers, and getting his team back on top. And after losing the Super Bowl, may have had one of the best drafts of any team coming off that devastating loss. Today, we're going balls deep on the Eagles. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh, and with my code That'sGood16, you'll get an insane 16 free meals plus free shipping at HelloFresh.com. Now, I just made my family the Monterey Jack unfried chicken, and because HelloFresh cares about quality, I'm getting seasonal ingredients picked at peak ripeness, which go from farm to my table in less than 7 days. I'm extremely picky with my produce, and I've never received a bad piece in any of my HelloFresh boxes. Not only is HelloFresh cheaper than the grocery store, it's saving me stacks as I've cut down the number of times we order delivery every month. It's way cheaper than delivery, tastes better because your food is fresh and hot, doesn't arrive lukewarm, and the variety with over 40 weekly recipes and 100 items to choose from, HelloFresh keeps dinner sexy. Or maybe that's just my oven mitt that makes me sexy. And if you're hosting guests, check out the HelloFresh Market to add appetizers, snacks, and sides for your next get-together. Stop overpaying for your meals and go to HelloFresh.com and use my code That'sGood16 or the link below to get 16 free meals. Oven mitt not included. It's not often that a quarterback wins Super Bowl MVP and then isn't the starting quarterback for his team the following season. But that's exactly what happened to Big Dick Nick Foles after earning the honors in Super Bowl 52. Philly was in a luxurious position. Nick Foles started the 2018 season for the team as Carson Wentz, who was on an MVP pace before tearing his ACL the year before, continued to rehab his knee. By week 3, though, Wentz got the starting job back and led Philly to a 20-16 win over the Colts. The Eagles' title defense in 2018 looked eerily similar to the season before, really emerging as the team's identity as Wentz was a mixed bag at the quarterback position. Deja vu, though, struck again, and Philly lost Carson Wentz to injury late in the season. The reigning Super Bowl MVP Nick Foles stepped back into the lineup and led the Eagles to 3 straight wins down the stretch and a playoff berth. It was like God wanted Wentz on the bench, and God got his wish.
Told you it was going to get awkward.
In the wild card round in Chicago, the Birds advanced as the beneficiary of the infamous double doink. one of the most famous field goal misses since Scott Norwood, but were ousted a week later in a back-and-forth game in the Superdome against the New Orleans Saints. Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson had an interesting decision to make at quarterback. Carson Wentz played very well in 2017, but was proving to be a bit injury prone and not super consistent. But Nick Foles had accumulated 4 postseason wins in the previous 2 years. The Brass in Philly ultimately chose the former number 2 overall pick over the man who hoisted the Lombardi, handing Wentz a 4-year, $128 million extension in 2019 that would have kept him under center in Philly through the 2024 season.
All right, North Dakota kid. How about playing with Eagles for many more years?
You sure about that?
Foles walked in free agency, joined a sinking ship in Jacksonville, and a week 1 injury opened the door for a rookie by the name of Gardner Minshew, a guy who, ironically enough, also became an Eagles backup during a Super Bowl run. A guy who most straight men would also gladly have sex with and still identify as heterosexual. Now, the extension of Wentz looked like the right move. At first, anyway. In 2019, Wentz was good enough to lead Philly to an NFC East title at 9-7, but was concussed and left the game after playing just 9 snaps in the Eagles' first-round loss to Seattle. And Eagles fans still blame Jadeveon Clowney for ruining Carson Wentz. Now, there was no Nick Foles to save them, just Josh McCown playing in his 76th season as a backup. In the 2020 NFL Draft, though, just a few months after that loss, GM Howie Roseman made one of the worst picks of his career, and a round later, followed it up with one of his best. But first, let's get a little background on old Howie Roseman, the Wizard. Roseman was hired as a front office intern by the Eagles as a 25-year-old all the way back in the year 2000. To give some perspective, they were a year removed from hiring Andy Reid as their head coach and drafting Donovan McNabb as their franchise QB. That was a long, long time ago. Roseman then ascended the ladder, working for a decade in various positions before eventually being named general manager in 2010. Roseman shared most of the GMing responsibilities with then head coach Andy Reid. It was Roseman and Eagles team owner Jeffrey Lurie, though, who decided to let Andy Reid go, which means Jeff Lurie is really responsible for destroying my Broncos. Now, Roseman was finally in full control of building the team as a true GM, a responsibility he then lost in 2015 when Eagles ownership named third-year head coach Chip Kelly that he brought in as coach and GM, only to fire Chip Kelly after a 6-9 start to that season. Remembering Kelly lasted that long as the Eagles head coach is actually quite shocking. Roseman eventually won his title back, and his first moves after being reinstated as GM were to hire Dougie P, aka Doug Peterson, and trade up for North Dakota State quarterback Carson Wentz. Cut to 4 years later in 2020, and the Eagles were sitting on the 21st overall pick and wanted to take a wide receiver in what was supposed to be a loaded class. Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and CeeDee Lamb all off the board. Roseman and his scouts had to make a decision between Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., and TCU receiver Jalen Reagor. Yeah, they went Reagor, so they made the incorrect decision. But one round later, they hit a home run. Jalen Hurts. It really didn't make sense to draft Jalen Hurts at the time. Luckily, the Packers drafted Jordan Love in the first round after trading up. That insane move took a lot of attention away from the Hurts pick. Love really does hurts. Hurts was best remembered, though, as the guy that got pulled for Tua in the college football championship game in 2017. Hurts transferred to Oklahoma, became a more complete QB in the Big 12, and was a worthy second-round pick, to say the least. It just didn't make a lot of sense a year removed from extending your QB in Carson Wentz. Or maybe it did. Maybe Roseman is 10 moves ahead. Doug Peterson explained the pick by saying, with Jalen Hurts, he has a unique skill set. You see what Taysom Hill has done in New Orleans, and now he and Drew Brees have a connection there and a bond there. And you even look at Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore for the short period of time, how they gelled together. It's just something we're going to explore, like sexuality in college. Well, that last part, maybe he didn't say.
Sean Payton was able to have success with Bridgewater and Taysom, but
of course, Peterson wasn't around to coach Jalen Hurts as a full-time starter after a disastrous season by Wentz in 2020 and a bizarre tank job in Week 17 that included meaningful playing time for Nate Sudfeld over Hurts. Peterson was let go after a 4-11-1 season in the year of COVID. Just 3 years removed from the Super Bowl. I mean, look, Howie Roseman's decision to fire Doug Peterson is probably his most savage move as a GM. Somehow, it was also the right call, and I say that after we just watched Doug Peterson do the impossible and save the Jaguars as their head coach. He's a very good head coach, but knowing when it's time to move on from even a good head coach takes a different kind of awareness. Enter alleged frat guy Nick Sirianni, the Colts offensive coordinator who didn't exactly nail his opening press conference.
We're gonna have systems in place that are easier to learn. Because when we can learn our system and we can get good at our system, then our talent can take over. Less thinking equals talent take over.
Sirianni entered the fray along with offensive coordinator Shane Steichen and defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon, both head coaches now. But the Colts, at the time, their head coach Frank Reich hired Sirianni as his offensive coordinator, which is interesting because Frank Reich was the OC on that 2017 Eagles team that helped them outclass the Pats on the biggest stage. Now, I mention Reich because he did a lot for the Eagles offense in 2017 and is a huge reason Philly made it back to the Super Bowl from the 2022 season. Both because he groomed Nick Sirianni and because he became the main reason the Eagles were able to move on from Carson Wentz so easily. Reich loved Wentz, and Roseman got off of Wentz's contract by sending him to the Colts and acquiring a conditional first-round pick in 2022 and a third in 2021. New defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon was able to work with former All-Pro cornerback Darius Slay, who the Eagles acquired in 2020 for pennies on the dollar, just a third and a fifth round pick in exchange for a corner cast out of Detroit by Matt Pencil Dick Patricia, who would ultimately recover to make the Pro Bowl as a corner in both 2021 and 2022. And now, of course, the Eagles hired Matt Patricia as a senior defensive assistant. That's one move I can't figure out right now. Now, that became a theme for Philly, finding a way to upgrade their secondary on the cheap. When their division rival Giants cut James Bradbury, the Eagles were there to scoop him up. When the Saints made C.J. Gardner-Johnson available, Philly was there with 3 late-round picks to make him an Eagle, giving their defense an extra edge and attitude, a guy who was unafraid to talk shit directly to Tom Brady's face. Smart choice. Bradbury, of course, is a bit disgraced following that hold at the end of Super Bowl 57, and Gardner-Johnson, well, he left and joined the Lions. So what does Howie Roseman do? Well, he went out and got some low-risk, high-upside acquisitions in Greedy Williams and Terrell Edmonds, and I have a feeling at least one of those guys meets their potential in a defense that's going to cause quarterbacks to get rid of the ball earlier than they'd like to. The Eagles also spent a couple picks on the secondary, adding Sidney Brown and another Bulldog, Keely Ringo, who a lot of draft dudes thought could be a first-round pick. Naturally, the Eagles got him in the 4th. In the front 7, you're getting another year out of 2022 first-round pick, Georgia Space Eater Jordan Davis, and free agent splash pickup from last offseason, Hassan Reddick, who helped the Eagles go from the 20th scoring defense to a top 10 unit in the course of 2 offseasons. And then they added Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter, Bulldogs as well, into the mix, and this is one of the scariest young pass rushing units in the league. Moving to offense, the Eagles have assembled a dynamic, versatile receiving room. Despite the swing and miss with Jalen Reagor, the Eagles were totally unafraid to go back to the well at receiver, spending a 2021 top 10 pick on Alabama Heisman winner Devontae Smith, which they had the capital to acquire because of the Carson Wentz trade. Smith accumulated over 2,100 yards in his first couple seasons and is criminally underrated in my eyes. Now, feeling that they needed a big boy to complement Smith, Roseman essentially got Titans GM John Robinson fired when he swapped the 18th overall pick in the 2022 draft for Pro Bowl wideout A.J. Brown, who set the Eagles' single-season receiving record this past year, his first with the team. So, Roseman drafted Wentz, overpaid Wentz, watched Wentz drain his faith in Doug Peterson, fired Doug, traded Wentz, and turned that trade into Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Knowing how to move on from your incorrect moves is the greatest attribute a GM can have. That's why the Eagles will keep doing it right, because even the best GMs will miss. Now, Roseman also made the hard decision to trade tight end Zach Ertz, a Philly favorite and Super Bowl 52 hero, but it gave 2018 second-round pick Dallas Goedert the room to develop into a top-flight tight end as both a receiver and a blocker. Goddard was the third tight end taken in that draft behind Hayden Hurst and Mike Gesicki, and while I think he's better than both of those players, Mark Andrews was available for everyone well into the third. But I digress. Pretty much everyone on the Eagles can block. They invested their 2021 and 2022 second-round picks in Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens to round out an offensive line that finished number 1 in 2022 according to Pro Football Focus. Now, you can take PFF's word for it, or you can just watch the Eagles, use your own fucking eyeballs, and see them maul opposing defensive lines every single week using, of course, their signature play, a rugby scrum-style quarterback sneak that just doesn't fail. They saw what the Ravens did to build around Lamar Jackson, and they did the same for Jalen Hurts with greater success, and they paid him before the Ravens paid Lamar Jackson, who was drafted 2 years before Hurts. And Hurts gave them a more team-friendly contract than Lamar. Now, Philly also signed edge rusher Hassan Reddick in the 2022 offseason, which I briefly mentioned, but he did go on to finish with the second most sacks in the NFL in 2022. Reddick helped revitalized the Eagles' front seven and made them flat out nasty. Now, a forgotten element of the 2017 Eagles Super Bowl run, at least to non-Eagles fans, was the obscure group of running backs who all came together to average 123 yards per game in the playoffs. LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, and Corey Clement all worked because of that O-line. And this last season, Miles Sanders and Jalen Hurts helped Philly average 147 rushing yards per game, 5th best in the league. Miles Sanders is gone, but here's where Howie Roseman starts playing chess. He acquires Rashad Penny in the offseason, who, if healthy, is an insanely talented running back, and then during the draft, gives up more pennies for running back DeAndre Swift, who the Lions pissed off, who now has a chip on his shoulder, and if either Penny or Swift stay healthy, they are an improvement over Miles Sanders. The run game's important to this team, and they've got two backs who could be 1,000-yard rushers. If healthy, low risk, high reward, yet again. This is where Howie Roseman really does deserve praise. Again, he trades away Wentz to his old friend Frank Reich. Admitting you fucked up your QB situation takes big balls. Selling broken parts to a friend? Even bigger balls. Then he fires the head coach that led his team to the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. Roseman assembles another dominant team, one that is undefeated through the first 2 months of 2022, and he still adds pieces during the season. That's a GM that knows they are a Super Bowl contender and that he's not going to stop adding players until he puts that team over the top. CJ Gardner-Johnson, mid-season acquisition, and he just simply led the team with 6 picks. They traded for Robert Quinn in October. Didn't really work out there, but they also signed signed Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph midseason. Suh, Joseph, and Quinn combined for over 500 snaps, helping that defensive line stay fresh and aggressive. All of these moves preempted a dominant run through the NFC side of the bracket and nearly won them a Super Bowl in Arizona. On the heels of that loss, it's fair to say that the Eagles may have gotten even better following a 2023 draft that experts and scouts almost unanimously praised. So much so that other GMs were said to have complained about all of the good press Howie Roseman was getting. But there's no way Roseman doesn't deserve that praise. It feels like he's smarter than everyone else, while also making the most obvious picks in the draft. He's always got a contingency plan, which has allowed him to fix his bad draft picks, which every GM has, and he can do it because he has an owner who believes in him, has the bankroll to add to contenders on the fly, and trust in the process.
I'm fucking forgiven for your first fucking Super Bowl.
And that's why the Philadelphia Eagles will continue to dominate in the NFL for the foreseeable future. Thanks for watching Balls Deep here on That's Good Sports. Check out another Balls Deep or just subscribe.